There's a lot of young women I carry with me, a lot of young women who were very unjustly, and I remember their names and I remember their stories and I remember everything about Crystal and Julie and how the system let them down, failed them appallingly. When I started in this job and I said the National Plan's objective is to end domestic, family and sexual violence, people roll their eyes and say that's bordering on trivialising it because it's not an achievable objective. But it is achievable within a generation.
I know for a lot of people who lose a loved one, can be quite a long time between their death and having the ability to speak. It's like there's a barrier there, often emotional, often psychological, and then there's a point where the speaking is the most important. Do you know the point in your life where that happened, where that change happened?
There's been a few points where I've Sue's really stayed with me a lot, but the thing that really, this year, was it this year, Sherelle? I can't even remember.
We lost a woman in Geelong, and I remember you contacting me.
And I've lost when that was.
That was a few months ago. It was around February.
Yeah, okay, so we're May. I'm losing track of what time where we are in the year. I was driving, so I've been commuting between just past Geelong and Melbourne, and I was driving past the Eastern Beach, and I literally was driving past the morning she was found, and I was very, very distressed for a whole range of reasons. It upset me. It upset me because the thing that upset me the most was that it felt so parallel, that here was another woman who wasn't being paid attention to. Here's another woman who, because she was homeless, she was drinking, she wasn't being valued and wasn't named for quite a while, and the way they told the story about and it just, the parallel with Sue just felt like an absolute kind of gut wrench. And that made me really, they were very close in age. It just, the stories, really opened it up for me.
When you say the parallels, it's interesting because it's around 34 years since Sue was killed, and 34 years later, a woman dies in very similar circumstances. And you're right, it's exactly the same. It's another woman from the wrong side of the tracks, the wrong type of victim, and she's swept under the rug. And, it's astounding that we've gone more than 3 decades and we still are having this situation where women's lives are of so little value that the location of her murder is more prominent than the murder herself or of her name or anything about her life.
Yeah, I was very upset about that, Sherelle. That was what really distressed me. I thought we don't know this woman, somebody might love and I'm sure somebody loves and treasures this woman, and she has all sorts of special and gifts like my Sue did, but that's not what we're hearing about, and she's not being honoured or valued, and the way we are talking about it is appalling. So yeah, I was very upset listening to that.
So your life, tell me about your career and how Sue has influenced it.
I think more than I knew. I think when all of this was happening, one of my first jobs, I was working in a women's refuge. So when I left school, I didn't want to be a social worker. I didn't want to do this work because I'd watched my mother and my grandmother were both social workers, and I watched how hard they work, and I watched them bringing home work and being distressed, and I didn't want to do that. And again, I think I wanted to be an artist, I wanted to do art. So I went to uni and I did art for about 2 years, and then I ended up being the women's officer, and I ended up, fighting for women's safe space on campus, and And I remember talking to Sue about that, and she was really proud of me, and she was always really proud of anything, you know. But I think I don't think I really understood how much I gravitated to working in women's safety, whether it was family violence or sexual violence, because of my family. I don't think I understood how much that was driving, that I understood the work and the importance of it, and I felt passionate about that it was something I wanted to do something about.
Throughout your career, what were some of the things that you've done? And I guess the big question is, how did you become the National Commissioner for Domestic Violence, or the National Domestic Violence Commissioner?
So I've really worked in violence against women and children my whole career, and I haven't really done anything else. I've done slightly different adjacent jobs, but not much. I was a family violence. I worked in a women's refuge. I worked in what's now Safe Steps in Victoria. It was just a women's refuge run by a collective of women. Started there when I was 23, I think. I went from there to work in a sexual assault centre, and I worked there with homeless young people. So I've spent my whole career doing this kind of work, and I really, it's funny, those things about not, particularly I think women, not necessarily seeing the pattern until you look back, not recognising that there was a path until I look back and I go, oh yeah, there's a path there. It's pretty clear what you've kind of, you know. I had 2 kids myself, pretty young, and they are the biggest kind of gift and helped me get through and grounded me through that. And I think I actually was having a conversation with Joe Ball the other day, and we were talking about the people who we carry with us. And he was talking about that, people who are there with you in the room when they're not, people we do this work for, people who can't speak for themselves, people who drive us. And he was so articulate about the way he described it. I thought, I don't know that I've ever quite really articulated it in the same way, but absolutely. And for me, there's a lot of young women I carry with me, a lot of young women who were very unjustly, and I remember their names, and I remember their stories, and I remember everything about Crystal and Julie and how the system let them down, failed them appallingly, and ended up blaming them. There was one young woman I worked with for a long time who'd been sexually abused in her family, my family member, and she was in foster care, and foster care placement broke down because the foster father sexually harassed her. And she was, at the first time when I went and got her and we helped find another placement, she was outraged, and how could they do that? And by the 6th placement breakdown, she said, what's wrong with me? Why does this keep happening to me? And I will never forget her and my heartbreak, that having watched that process of her taking responsibility for a system that failed her appallingly over and over again. So I feel like people like Sue and Crystal and the other people like that, mostly, and it is a lot of young women who I've watched how the detail of what the system can do to be helpful or unhelpful. And I went and worked overseas for a few years because I'd done a lot of work on trauma, understanding trauma recovery. And I had a window in my life when my kids were old enough and independent, and my parents were still independent, and kind of I was in that sandwich bit when I didn't have any caring responsibility. So I went and worked in Asia. And it was an absolute gift of a time to go. I worked in Cambodia and Afghanistan and Myanmar, and I learned so much about working in different cultures and about really understanding what I had taken for granted about the wisdom of, particularly of Aboriginal and Torres Strait, my Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues, and Muriel Bamblett in particular. I remembered I'd worked with her a lot. I then went and worked in Asia where there was not quite the same respect or what I realised, stride and understanding about the importance of culture. And during that time, we had the Family Violence Royal Commission here in Victoria. And I was working with people in Asia mostly local people there, who were passionately trying to help their own communities. And I remember thinking, I need to go home. I need to go home. I have a community of my own. I have a responsibility, and I want to go and help my people and my community in the way that I am watching these men and women passionately care for their communities. And so I came home just at the end of the Royal Commission. Part of the reason I came home also was my father had Alzheimer's, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and I wanted to come home and be part of that. So I came back in, and it was just before COVID. And then this job came up, and I remember thinking long and hard about, do I know what this job is going to be like? Do I want to do this job? I know how hard it's going to be from a whole lot of perspectives. I know how hard it's going to be starting something new, setting something up. I'd never worked for the public service. I'd always kind of worked in the community sector, and I wasn't sure I wanted to go and work in government. But I remember it was Saturday morning, I had 5 people text me, post me a photo of the ad, you should look at this job. So I hadn't seen it. I hadn't seen the job. And I was like, oh, no, really? Why, how could I do that? I couldn't do that job. I haven't done anything. I'm not, And then I thought, okay, maybe that many people. It was literally across, while we were having breakfast across a Saturday morning. It was in the paper. And I also remember laughing about being surprised at the number of my friends who read The Australian, because it was all the ad was in The Australian. I'm thinking, how come all my friends are reading? Why have you all seen this ad? So I applied for the job. And I think I feel very glad to be doing it at this end of my career because of what I've learnt, and that I can bring that. I feel like having worked in the sector and having the grounding in being a social worker, which commissions often don't have, I think that's been a gift for me. I feel very, particularly in Australia, I feel one of the things that's been the biggest gift of this job, I think, is how generous people are in welcoming you into their lives and sharing their stories and their culture, and the contact I have, the generosity I have been welcomed into Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities has been the most incredible privilege of my life, really. People, because of having a commission title, in a way that I don't know that I would have, not about those people not being generous, but I've just had an opportunity to learn about people's lives, and for people to share their experiences and what their world is like with this incredible generosity of wanting things to be better for others. The thing that strikes me almost every conversation is people opening up what is some of the hardest things in their life because they want the incredible generosity of not wanting it to happen to anybody else, wanting to change the world, the system, the part of whatever happened to them, so that no one else has to experience what they or their family members or the person they loved have experienced is just an incredible privilege.
For someone who doesn't has never heard of the role, and I'm assuming that there are some people, can you explain what the role entails, like what your responsibility is?
So the Domestic Family and Sexual Violence Commission was established 3.5 years ago. I'm the first commissioner. It was established as one of the things about commissions and commissioners that I have learnt is that we've got lots of them, and every single one is different, depending on what the way they were set up and what the legislative framework is. And one of the things that always amuses me enormously is whenever I go anywhere near the police, commissioners are treated like royalty. I go other spaces and commissioners and commissions have very different standing. So this commission was set up as non-statutory, so we don't have statutory legislation that enables the commission. So, for example, not like the Human Rights Commission and not like a lot of the state-based commissions. So this commission was established by the Commonwealth Government. So I'm a national, so responsible for broadly across the country. And really the way I describe, there are four key aspects to what the Commission's role is. Fundamentally, the foundation of it is, in my view, to support the success of the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children. I'm here to help anybody's and everybody's efforts to make that come true, to achieve that objective. So government have tasked me, the first area of that is to promote the national plan and the value and importance of those objectives and to hold government accountable to delivering on that objective and to monitor the efforts of government around the implementation of that plan. And the biggest lever I have with regard to that is I've been tasked with providing a yearly report to National Parliament. So that's the first objective. It's a bit tricky because a lot of the Commonwealth has leadership role around the country's response to domestic, family and sexual violence, but fundamentally most of the service delivery and work is done by states and territories. And I'm a Commonwealth Commissioner, so I have no real power. I have no real power over to investigate or compel data or information from the states and territories who do most of the work. So one of the other areas of responsibility of the Commission is to improve coordination and collaboration in response to domestic, family and sexual violence. And that's one of the areas that I lean really heavily on, building relationships with jurisdictions, helping, again, my approach to that is my job is to help us be collectively successful in ending domestic, family and sexual violence. And one of the things I have really borrowed from the homelessness sector is that the way the homelessness sector has talked about ending rough sleeping is making it rare, brief and non-recurrent. Because when I started in this job and I said the national plan's objective is to end domestic, family and sexual violence, people roll their eyes and say that's bordering on trivialising it because it's not an achievable objective. But it is achievable within a generation if we took it really seriously to make domestic, family and sexual violence rare, brief and non-recurrent. It is. We have done that with AIDS, we have made fundamental, major transformation. We kind of forget when things become normal, when gay marriage is now normal, when women have the right to vote normal, when we stop treating Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander legislatively as though they're fauna. Those things have all happened in my lifetime. So we can do it. We just need to believe it's possible and we need to make the kinds of changes. So the Commission's responsibility is promoting the national plan and its objectives, and I believe we have to believe it's true to do it, to improve coordination and collaboration, and that point about it's going to take the Commonwealth and every state and territory and the police and the education department and social services and health. Everybody is going to have to see it as core business and their job and not somebody else's job to do to change it. The third, and these are not in order, they're all equally important, area of responsibility the government has charged the Commission with is it's described in the order establishing the Commission as amplifying the voices of lived experience and embedding lived experience perspectives in all government processes. And I absolutely believe that the only way we are going to do this is if we listen to the detail of people's experiences and understand what their experience of what helped them, what didn't help them, what would help them, what would change their experience of systems. And also, the other thing that I think is really important about really listening to people's direct experiences of the way we respond to domestic, family, and sexual violence is even really well-intentioned policies, as we implement them, can have unintended consequences that cause harm. So the best example of that from a policy perspective is the family law system. Family law, changes to the way family law was, the way we set up the family law court and the whole family law system was driven by women wanting to make it easier for women to leave relationships. It was all about no-fault divorce, and it was all about how could women escape relationships that were not good for them, that were unsafe, that were violent, without having... So it was about changing those laws. We now know it's one of the systems that is actually causing women and children some of the greatest harm. So if we're not listening to people as we develop systems, then they can go off the rail really badly. Sometimes very intentionally they go off the rails, sometimes unintentionally. Sometimes, like a lot of what's happened with the family law system, has absolutely been men taking back power and changing those systems so that those systems were weaponised against women and children. So we have to have at the core, we have to really embed listening to both understanding what the problems are and the way people describe problems themselves, not thinking we're the experts and we can tell you what your problem is, because again, culturally it can be very different across for different groups of people, the way they interpret and understand the problem, and that is fundamentally important to understand and to respect that. Because if we don't hear the articulation of what a community, an individual sees as the problem for them, we're not going to come up with solutions that work for them. So lived experience is deeply important in this process. The fourth and final aspect of what the Commission's role and responsibility is to provide authoritative strategic advice to government, and that is bringing all of what we hear together. From my perspective, it's what I was saying before about the Commission, and as Commissioner, we hear and see things that we have a responsibility to provide government with advice about, seeing those problems, because as a community, the one thing I have also learnt through my career is we don't like looking at these problems. We don't like seeing the extent of domestic, family and sexual violence in our homes, in our communities, in our schools, in our systems. We don't want to know about it. A big part of the job is just to keep the mirror up, keep shining a light back on. This is what's happening here in our country and we need to be paying attention to it.
Ironically, I'm the kind of person who, is constantly criticising the government and criticising, I guess, particular roles in government, not necessarily your role. But when you're talking about, two of those points, one is the survivor experience-led input, and also the other point is around that actually violence, and I call it violence against women or male violence because I'm very much focused on that, the broad impact. Domestic and family violence, associate violence, and stranger violence. So ending all of those forms of violence. Yeah. My belief has always been that this is not inevitable. Violence against women is not inevitable. It is very much preventable. And as you say, we made changes around things that people didn't think were inevitable. Homelessness, a high road toll due to people not wearing seatbelts, AIDS, HIV and AIDS, and sexual STI transmissions, all of those things that you and I have both seen throughout our life. And you're right, if we can simplify violence against women to something that is actually understandable by everyone, we have an actual chance of getting to a point where no woman is killed, where women, children and men are living in safety. It is really quite a simple solution. The concept is very simple and it's very doable, but it actually needs a big cultural change as well as less fragmentation between our governments. So we need our Commonwealth government and we need our states and territories all on the same page, all delivering the same policy, all delivering the same rates of funding. So just really working together. And obviously, we need men to be a big part of this process. So in fact, I believe they're the major part of the process. Without all of that coming together, it can't happen. But it does need a strategy that actually simplifies it so that people can understand it in, literally a millisecond. It's like that journalism adage, write for a 12-year-old and everyone will get it. And I feel like that's what we need to do with ending violence against women. But the other thing is the stories. I've always believed that we cannot change violence against women without hearing the stories. And by hearing the stories, we see the points in her life where she could have been saved.
Yeah.
And that gives us evidence of what needs fixing. And when you, for instance, this podcast, when you listen to episode after episode, you kind of see 3 or 4 common themes that definitely need immediate responses. And one of those is the policing response. The other one is the legal response. And there are other ones there too, but we see it. You can just hear it back to back. I don't understand how we're in 2026 and all of the people who can make the difference are not actually on this page. How many more decades do we have to do this before we get to the point where we're all working together and cohesively?
It's a very good question. I absolutely agree with you and what you've just talked about. I think we absolutely have to listen to the stories. I think we need everybody on the same page. My role is about the approach that I take to my role is to go looking for the people within every system who know that it's not doing what it needs to do, go find them and back them in, because they're the ones, a bit like what we're talking about people's stories. Yeah, I'm the only one who's an expert in my life and understands how I've got to where I am. The people you talk to, they're the experts in their story. People who work within systems, whether it's police or health or education, they're the ones who understand those systems. They're the ones who are going to be able to change them. That's my view, is that you need a whole lot of drivers, and we're not getting enough change. And in fact, we're getting some backsliding in some areas that are deeply worrying. But understanding how to change those systems, you need the people who deeply understand those systems to be working with you. And there always are. There always are. My experience is every system, organisation I've spoken to, there's people who know. And if you can build relationships of trust around shared objectives, then you can help them drive the change that needs to happen.
Gosh, I can't wait for the time when we are at that stage. I think that there are some days, some weeks when it feels like, that all hope is lost, but you just have to keep on holding on to that hope and hoping that all of the right brains, all of the right stories, all of the right people, start connecting and we do start sort of connecting the dots, so to speak.
I feel like hope is a responsibility. I feel an enormous responsibility to hold on to hope and belief that we can change this. I have days where I find that hard to do, and you and I see a lot more of this world than a lot of people do. But that's why I'm saying I feel like it's a responsibility to hold on to that hope, because I have to believe, while I am doing this job, I have to believe it's possible to do. And it's one of the things that, because I think that if you don't have hope, then you won't drive change, right? So I don't mean hope as in a fluffy, we're all just going to sit around and believe someone else is going to do this. It's a hard-edged, what will it take to get there? But it's a belief. It's a very firm belief that we can do it.
So I want to know, when you're working and you're focused on the change, on making the change, what role does Sue play? How does she keep you driving forward, I guess?
Lots of ways. I think, driving here to come and meet with you, I was feeling very heavy. It's a heavy time. And I started thinking about honouring her. And it made me smile because she helped drive me because she was a generous, loving person who saw me. And that, when I'm not feeling strong, is good, right? To have that around. I feel some strength from her in that. The other is the other aspect of it is my rage and grief about the injustice of the end of her life, not just her death. That makes me deeply angry, but the grief about her not being given what she needed and the support she needed to have the rich and lovely life that I remember seeing her absolutely being able to have. So she's absolutely with me. She and other women like her both do they give me strength in who they were, but also the passion of a need to drive change for them.
What would you say to people has been the hardest part of losing Sue and of the path that you and your family have walked?
I feel enormous grief about her not being here, just not being here, and that she should have been here, and not having had her in my life, my kids' life, my daughter's life. I feel very, very sad about that. I think the hardest thing is the injustice of there being shame about her death rather than any sense of her having had any justice. That's one of the hardest things, and that's one of the things that's why I wanted to talk about her, and that's why the chance to honour her and her memory is a gift. So thank you for that, Sherelle. It's a real gift to be able to do that for her.
Sue was killed by a partner whose name is not known in Geelong on September 10, 1992. He was never charged with her murder. It is not known what happened to him. Sue Matters.
You've been watching She Matters, presented by Sherelle Moody, produced and edited with care at Dashmade Studios. If you would like to support She Matters and explore more of Sherelle's important work, please visit AustralianFemicideWatch.org. If this episode has brought anything up for you, there are support services available.